There's this really interesting logical puzzle at the heart of one of America's most unique religions. It's an accusation that its founding prophet, Joseph Smith, basically built his entire story on circular reasoning. But here's the twist. What happens when we take that exact same critical lens and turn it on the ancient prophets we've revered for centuries? That's what we're going to explore.
So that really gets to the heart of it, right? Is any claim to be a prophet just a matter of faith? Or is it a logical fallacy in disguise? And, maybe more importantly, is there one fair standard we can use to judge them all? Let's dive in.
All right, so first up, let's unpack this charge itself. Critics often point to a very specific logical fallacy they say is right at the core of Joseph Smith's story. This idea that his claims are, well, impossible to verify from the outside.
So what is circular reasoning anyway? Well, it's when you try to prove something by already assuming it's true. It's kind of like saying, he's a prophet because he says he is. If that's all the evidence you've got, you're just stuck in a logical loop.
So here's how the critic's argument usually goes. Step 1. Joseph Smith claims he got these golden plates from an angel. Okay, but the real issue, they say, comes in steps 2 and 3. Only he could translate them, and nobody else could independently check his work. And that leads to what they see as the fatal flaw. The conclusion that he's a prophet relies entirely on you accepting his very first unprovable claim.
Okay, but hold on. That's only one side of the story. Let's pivot and look at the case for the defense. Proponents argue that it absolutely does not all come down to Joseph Smith's word alone. They point to other kinds of evidence.
And the defense kicks off with a simple number, 11. See, this wasn't some solo act. 11 other people actually signed formal testimonies saying they had a direct, personal experience with the golden plates. This immediately complicates that whole idea that it was just one guy's unverified story. And here's what's so fascinating about these witnesses. They were split into two very different groups. You had the 3 witnesses who described a totally supernatural confirmation with an angel in God's voice, and then you had the 8 witnesses whose experience was purely physical. They claimed they held the plates, they felt the weight, they turned the pages. But the absolute crucial detail that defenders always highlight, even after some of these guys had major, bitter fallings out with Joseph Smith and left the church, not one of them ever denied what they originally said they saw and handled.
Now, beyond the witnesses, the defense brings up 2 more big points. First, there's the Book of Mormon itself. Believers ask, how could a young, uneducated farm boy create such a complex, sprawling text in such a ridiculously short amount of time? But the second point is maybe the most important of all. It completely shifts the basis of proof away from external logic and moves it to internal, personal confirmation through prayer. And this is where the whole debate gets really, really interesting. What happens if we take this same very strict standard of independent verification and apply it to other, much more ancient prophets from the Bible?
Just look at this table. It lays it all out so clearly. Think about Moses on Mount Sinai. Yeah, the people at the bottom of the mountain saw smoke and heard thunder, but they had to take his word for it that he was up there alone receiving God's law. What about Isaiah? His visions of the future were totally personal, no way to verify them at the time. And it's the same thing for Abraham's private promises from God. See the pattern here? In every single case, independent verification is a no, and the need for faith is a big yes.
So that comparison kind of forces you to ask a pretty pointed question, doesn't it? Are we applying a totally different standard of proof to modern claims than we do to the ancient ones we grew up with?
The argument here is that we often give ancient prophets a kind of historical pass, Their claims are seen through the soft, fuzzy lens of tradition and faith. But the second someone makes a similar kind of claim in the modern era, we pull out the microscope and demand a much stricter, almost scientific standard of proof.
And what all this reveals is that the debate isn't really about one man's claim at all. It's actually about a fundamental clash between 2 completely different ways of knowing what's true.
This takes us beyond just circular reasoning and into the world of epistemology, which, don't worry, is just a fancy word for the study of how we know things. The real question becomes, is the only valid kind of evidence something we can measure and prove logically, or can personal spiritual experience also be a legitimate way of knowing truth, at least within a framework of faith?
So in the end, the argument from the defense is that Joseph Smith's story isn't some weird logical anomaly. Instead, they say it fits a really consistent prophetic pattern that we see over and over again in Scripture. A personal revelation given to one person, confirmation by a small group of witnesses, a public message delivered to the world, and then an invitation for every single person to find out for themselves.
And so we're left with this question, for ancient prophets and modern ones alike. When it comes to claims of divine revelation, what is and what should be the ultimate standard of proof? Is it logic or is it something else entirely?